As a kid, I really gravitated towards scary shows and movies. Adults often ask me why I enjoyed watching content that existed solely to unnerve and terrify. This really frazzled my young mind. What was the reason? Little Josh didn't have an answer, but Big Josh sure does. The reason I enjoyed watching scary programs is because it allowed me to face my fears in a controlled environment. Sitting through an especially terrifying film or TV show felt like an endurance test.
Wake up, you pig! Look, Ren, a trick-or-treater. He's come to visit us.
And if I was able to make it through, I felt as if I had truly conquered something. As a kid, it made me feel pretty dang powerful. And let me tell you, growing up in the late 90s and early 2000s meant I had plenty of creepy children's programs to sink my teeth into.
Nickelodeon Fright Fest.
The Nickelodeon Fright Fest treats you to 12 Halloween Nick shows, one day early.
I mostly watched shows that aired on Nickelodeon and Cartoon Network. My fondest memories involve running down the aisles at my local Blockbuster and scooping up piles upon piles of VHS tapes. Tapes of shows like Goosebumps, Are You Afraid of the Dark, Invader Zim, and other spooky programs. These shows were my earliest introductions to horror, and few things gave me more comfort than popping in VHS tapes of my favorite family-friendly horror shows. The stories were often incredibly atmospheric and unnerving, especially for kids programming, but they were true feasts for the imagination.
Your face, so old, so hideous.
Flash forward to the present day, where I am now an adult who still obsesses over all things horror. I'm a filmmaker and movie critic, having created a number of short films and YouTube videos. This year, I decided to revisit the children's horror shows that shaped my childhood, but I won't be doing it alone. I've recruited 3 of my fellow horror fans to discuss some of the nostalgic family-friendly horror shows they grew up with. From Invading Aliens to Cowardly Dogs, these 4 children's horror shows left a mark on all of us. What were the scariest moments from these shows? Do they still scare you as adults? I asked my interviewees these questions and more, starting with...
I discovered Invader Zim because oftentimes as a kid, every time I would just get home from school, I would kind of go channel surfing and just randomly, by chance someday, I found the Nicktoons channel. Not even Nickelodeon. Nicktoons was like a separate entity where like a bunch of their shows that had ended, they would keep re-airing because this was years after Invader Zim had ended and it was no longer airing on Nickelodeon. But Nicktoons actually aired this show a bunch, and I watched it a lot out of curiosity as a kid, and just because a lot of my classmates at school really liked it, and yeah, I thought it was really funny. It sort of fit the mold of something like a bunch of the stuff I would watch on Cartoon Network, like Ed, Edd and Eddy, where it was just so ridiculously demented and hyper and twisted that the degree to which it was hyper and demented and twisted, I, at the very least, greatly respected.
Do you remember any episodes or sequences that really scared you as a kid, and what was so scary about them?
Oh God, yes. Well, I mean, there's a lot I can name, but I'll go with one. Because it's one specific episode in particular. You probably know which one I'm talking about. I think it's the one everyone knows about. It's the episode called Dark Harvest, where basically what happens is Zim's rival Dib basically taunts Zim at one point because essentially the plot of the show is Zim is an alien trying to take over Earth, and he disguises himself as this school kid. And Dib is one of his classmates. He's the only one who suspects he's an alien, and Dib basically taunts him one episode saying, because in this episode, Zim has to go to the nurse's office, and Dib tells him that she'll figure out he's an alien because he doesn't have any human organs. And so the plot of this episode is Zim goes around the school and starts harvesting his classmates' organs and replacing them with inanimate objects. and then he takes all these organs and stuffs them in his own body so he can pass as a human. And we see Zim at one point with like hundreds of organs inside his body, and he's just stuffed and bloated and super gross. I think he even coughs up an intestine at one point. And just the fact that it ends so dark, that it ends with him getting away with it and getting off scot-free, because Dib is like his final victim and he steals one of his organs. And the episode ends with Zim successfully passing as a human to the nurse, and she tells him how healthy he is and how he has all his organs.
The other one is just annoying. Fix it.
There! Why, you're one of the healthiest little children I've ever seen.
And so it ends with no consequences for him whatsoever. And I think that's part of just what makes that episode just so disturbing to me. And even now, I'm like, I can't believe that. I mean, it scared me as a kid. I'm shocked it didn't traumatize me, because it's funny because like a lot of people say Invader Zim is like on par with Rick and Morty in terms of how dark it is, and honestly I think this episode even takes the cake over Rick and Morty. At the risk of sounding just very pretentious, very auteur driven, because Jonan Vasquez, I think is the creator's name. I think he's written like a bunch of adult-oriented graphic novels, and that's the thing about the show. It feels very much born of him. It feels like no one would have made that show but him. And so that's the thing. Even if I didn't like the show, I would still at least respect it.
Share some of your favorite moments or episodes from the show.
The Doom song, or frankly, literally anything with Gur. Every single line Gur says, I still laugh at. Just the fact that he's really the only character in a show that's really cynical. That he's just so pure and innocent and childlike. Just like his dog, even just down to his dog disguise is like the cutest thing ever. There's one episode where he's just dancing in it, and I just laugh at it for some reason. So yeah, literally every single line Gur says, in particular the Doom song.
That should be your ringtone.
Well, I gave that a try. But I would say in terms of stuff that used to scare me, the concept I found a little scary as a kid. That not so much anymore. The animation style I found kind of creepy as a kid. Now I actually find the art direction kind of cool for that show. And even just like certain plot elements, just some of the body horror stuff, really, because I think there's one episode where it's like Dib gets severely mutated or something like that, and that freaked me out as a kid. That one doesn't anymore, again, because I've seen like Cronenberg and whatnot, and I'm just kind of, and Invader Zim looks pretty quaint compared to like The Fly, or even Crimes of the Future, which came out earlier this year. And then that episode with the space babies that mutated into a giant baby, that doesn't scare me anymore, but that's just because shit with babies always scared me as a kid. I mean, fuck, Rugrats scared me as a kid.
So, when I was a kid, I used to love this show. It's very fun, very light, love it. But as a kid, whenever it would come on TV or on Cartoon Network, that would be like the first show next to some of the other classic Cartoon Network shows that I would watch and really enjoy. So basically, like, one of my fondest memories of that show is just basically on like a weekend or on a day that I just get out of school and I turn on the TV and I'd see it would be on. I'd be like, oh my gosh, we're gonna sit and watch this. And whether it would be like a marathon of it, or it just had back-to-back episodes, or it was just one episode, I just found myself always getting pulled into it. I would basically say that one of the episodes and sequences that sticks out the most to me of the scariest would probably, like, everybody knows this is probably one of the episodes that is very memorable in the Courage the Cowardly Dog show. But is basically when Courage finds the slab in his backyard, and it was like a slab of an ancient mummy or ancient burial, and Eustace sees on TV that, oh, you know, if he finds a slab, he will get this big award with big money, and everybody knows Eustace is gonna be all for it because he's kind of like I want to say he's like the bad guy, but you know, nobody really likes him because he's always just so mean to Courage. But you know, so he sees that he can get a lot of money for it, and since Courage found it, he's like, oh, I found it, I'm going to go turn it in. And before he can even do that, basically the ancient burial comes back to get his slab, and he's like, return the slab.
Return the slab.
What?
Return the slab, or suffer my curse.
What's your offer?
Another episode that kind of sticks out to me is when Mariel's, I believe it's her uncle or her cousin, well, some family member of hers comes to visit, and he's this really creepy guy because he'd always like slowly look at Courage and give him this creepy like grin, and you're just like, there's something up with this guy. We don't know what's wrong with him, but there's something up with him. And then it comes to find out that like he likes to shave the head, or like shave hair off of just anything. And he's talking about how he would shave the hair off of his hamster until it was basically a naked hamster, and then like his sister, he shaved off her hair, and then he's trying to he doesn't try, he successfully shaves off all of Courage's fur, and like he leaves the little patch of fur on his tail because apparently he thinks that's just too weird if he shaved that off. But that was kind of creepy just because it was like this guy had a fascination with shaving hair. But you know, like it you know, you think of it and you're like, oh yeah, as a kid you were really scared of it, and now you're just like, it's kind of funny.
Courage.
So I would definitely have to say some of the fondest moments would be when they would uncover everything and you realize that it's not as bad as it seems in the show, and you know, everybody pretty much is good and happy again. And yeah, so I would say there's a lot of those in the show. Basically just I can't really pick and choose which one because there were just so many of those moments, but especially when they would get some of them would get very dark, and you would be like, okay, what's gonna happen next? And it all kind of like comes together, and the way the director would be creative with it was kind of neat.
Oh! Hey, I better stop that. I can begin to like it.
I would definitely say a lot of the plot lines do not scare me as much anymore because it's just, like I said, it's very fun and light with the horror, and because I have like seen a lot worse than that, and knowing, you know, like some of them can be very dark in other horror movies and stuff, just like a lot of it just is more fun now. Like I look back at some of the episodes that I thought were scary, and I'm just like, it's kind of funny, it's kind of cute now.
Huh?
But yeah, I would definitely, I guess, like I said, even being 29 years old now, I still look back and watch a lot of the shows because they're very fun, and it definitely brings me back to a place of my childhood of watching this show, and I enjoy it. And of course, like, who doesn't love Courage? He is this very lovable dog who's just scared.
Stupid dog! You made me look bad!
So first question regarding your children's horror show. Do you have any fond memories of watching this show as a kid?
Absolutely. It was a tradition in my family. Dad would make a bowl of popcorn when he would watch his documentaries, and then he would see that I was watching something, and he would actually pour a little popcorn into a smaller bowl for me and say, enjoy the show. So it was nice. So it's one of the fun memories I have with my dad. We had them on streaming services. Nickelodeon played it a lot. We were one of the first families on our block to get the DVR, and I watched the reruns of that. There was one where they clearly did an homage to Jaws, and they filmed under the water, and I think it was just the type of music that they used where I was just like, all right, this is a little more advanced than what I was used to, because I was used to more of like the PG horror, and I was just like, wow, I'm surprised you did this sequence in a kid's show.
For Ace! Get out of there, swim!
They kept it pretty tame, and I mean, sometimes they would dip into the public domain for stories. Like, I remember one episode they did their version of Ichabod Crane and the Headless Horseman.
Was it like a direct adaptation, or was it just very similar?
It was just similar. Like, you knew who Ichabod was, but that story is fairly complex, and they abridged it for the half-hour program.
Do you have any other favorite moments or episodes from the show that you would like to share, or things that really stuck with you?
The one sequence that always made me laugh was Are You Afraid of the Dark? Were stories that were told by a group of kids called the Midnight Society. And one of the kids said that he wasn't afraid of anything. And somebody brought along a box with a hole in it and said, your greatest fear is in this box. And I remember there was a really long sequence where the guy who wasn't afraid of anything took forever to put his hand in the box, and his fingers touched the rim of the circle of the box, and then he chickened out and left. And the second guy opened it to reveal literally nothing in the shoe.
Do you think, given today's climate with the way children's shows have become, do you think Are You Afraid of the Dark would still air like the way it is? Or do you think it would be a bit like more censored, tame?
I think you could get away with airing it now, no changes. Especially since what they're pushing towards kids these days now. Are You Afraid of the Dark seems to be on par. I mean, I liken it to Hocus Pocus, things like that, so.
Sorry, my lad. I didn't mean to scare you. Gonna give it a go, huh?
Yeah. Yeah, why not?
Why not, indeed? It's the most fun in the park when you're laughing in the dark.
Nothing still scares me about the show. No, it's as you get older and actually going to film school, you kind of see the tips and tricks that they used, where it's like, oh, okay. And then you can tell what was clearly a set and what wasn't a set, and you're like, oh, all right. I'm glad kids will like this, but...
Is there anything you used to find scary but simply don't anymore, like upon rewatch?
It's been a while since I've rewatched the show. I wanted to try and find the clip that scared me, but the thing I remember the most about the underwater clip was they used a red filter, so it looked like the monster was already bleeding from the eyes. Now I could probably watch that and be like, okay, this is weird, but it was a little more advanced for what I was used to.
Haven't done this in a while. Submitted for the approval of the Midnight Society. I call this story... Whoa. That's kinda not normal.
I don't know what it was about the shows on Cartoon Network, but I never got into them. And then Disney... No, I mean, it was... I grew up in the Nickelodeon age, and when you're a kid, if you like something, you tend to stick with it. I tend to be a loyal consumer that way, so...
And then last question. In recent years, there actually was an Are You Afraid of the Dark reboot. Did you hear about that, and have you seen any clips from the reboot?
I have heard about the reboot. I haven't watched any clips of it. I honestly thought that they were just going to pursue it. I didn't know that it had been filmed. So I look forward to checking it out and see what they do.
So I first discovered Goosebumps through the books, actually. We used to pass the books to each other in the classroom. Somebody might be reading a copy of Night of the Living Dummy and someone else might be interested in reading it. So I discovered it that way first. And the TV show, as far as any fond memories I have of watching it as a kid, it was definitely a Halloween favorite. Like, I remember running to my local Blockbuster and just gathering as many VHS tapes, as possible because, Goosebumps, it was one of those shows that had scary elements, but it still felt safe because, it never went too far. It wasn't like a Tales from the Crypt or anything like that. There were scary stories for kids.
My beautiful bride. See? I even brought the ring.
I remember watching an episode called One Day at Horrorland, and that episode involved a family that was on vacation and they get lost in the middle of nowhere and they end up at this really bizarre, freakish theme park that is run by literal monsters. And I remember after watching that episode, my parents actually approached me and said that we were going to go on a family vacation, and I just freaked out because I thought we were gonna end up like the family, in that episode. We were gonna get lost and end up at, Horrorland. That was just the way my mind worked, as a kid. But I just have so many fond memories of watching the show during Halloween, and I'd always, stay up late and, watching them, until I got too tired. My parents would be asleep upstairs and I'd be down, alone in the basement, just watching, all this scary material. And man, I just felt so tough because, even with something like Goosebumps, I mean, it was, pretty, it was pretty challenging to watch something like that at such a young age. And, getting through it just made me feel just so accomplished.
That's what I call a cliffhanger!
So there was definitely an episode that really struck a nerve with me because I always had an obsession with like masks as a kid. Like, I loved to collect like Halloween masks. I don't know what it was, but it was just something that I really enjoyed doing. And one of the more infamous episodes of the show was called The Haunted Mask, and it was basically about this little girl who's fearful of everything. And she gets picked on by these two kids, and one day she finally decides to have some revenge on these kids. So she goes to this newly opened mask shop, and she actually stumbles upon this really creepy looking Halloween mask. And it's actually a pretty, scary premise because as soon as she puts the mask on, it automatically sticks to her face. And just the idea that this deformed face could become a permanent part of you, like you can't take it off, that's actually pretty chilling and unnerving. I remember there was one part in the episode where she's looking at herself in the mirror and there's like no seam on the mask, like it has literally become attached to her skin. And just the fear and panic in her voice, as she looks at her reflection, like just realizing that this could become a permanent part of her life now. Like, it was just, honestly, it was just terrifying, and it honestly made me never want to put on a Halloween mask ever again. I can tell you that much. And then, does anything about the show still scare me all these years later? Not necessarily, because I'm an adult who has watched hundreds upon hundreds of horror movies, so, it's kind of difficult to scare me these days. But, Goosebumps is one of the earliest horror shows I remember watching, and it may have been my big introduction to horror. So, it's cool that a child can watch a show like that and they can develop a lifelong, passion for the horror genre, which is exactly what happened to me. R.L. Stine was always described as, the kid-friendly version of Stephen King, although he's also written some, more mature novels, to my understanding. But, he always wrote these books with kids in mind. He never went too far. They were never too gory or, too intense. They were just right.
It looks as if the mask maker left in a very big hurry. Wonder why? You'll soon find out. Viewers beware, you're in for a scare.
I
can't remember what network it was on, but I never watched the show on TV. But to my understanding, it is available, on Netflix, the last time that I checked. So, I'm just so excited that I can show, my nieces and nephews this show, a show that I grew up loving and played a huge part in my life. And, it made me appreciate horror as a genre that much more. So, people talk about the shows they watch as kids, and, they talk about how much of an impact they had on them. I mean, they really do. People just got to understand that the material that we consume as kids, it can help shape us. That's why so many pieces of fiction like Goosebumps will never truly disappear. I mean, they'll be around for generations upon generations because, there's something that we can share, something that we can tell, our kids about, shows that, helped form us and, made us the adults who we are today. And one last thing I'd like to say, if I can get my hands on some of those old Goosebumps novels, like especially the paperback ones, I'd be very happy. Just, man, the nostalgia overflow, that'd be truly amazing. I would honestly love to get my hands on some of the old books for sure.
If there's anything I learned from conducting these interviews, it's that we all hold precious memories of watching scary shows. Even if these children's horror shows were a bit intense, we were drawn to them because, in a way, they made us feel more grown up. Watching them, we felt tough, brave, and resilient. Also, they prepared us for the real world. They showed us that the world is full of scary, perilous threats, but they frequently showed us how to face the scary things in life and conquer them. Even if the storylines were bizarre and outlandish, they still gave us some really useful lessons. Lessons that we've carried with us all our lives. So, the big question is, are these shows just for kids? I know full well, there's so much more to them than that.